My cat just jumped right up next to me. Hello everybody, you're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. We have local unsigned and independent music. And we have a weekly album review from Twangling Jack Ford over in the Oak Shed. As always, you can reach out to us here at the studio. My email address is dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. I particularly want to hear from poets, performers, musicians, anybody in the arts, anybody with arts news, people who think there might be a good guest, people with MP3s. Don't hesitate to get in touch. You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we're repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So this week, we are going to be chatting to the incredible poet Tori Wagg. And before we do that, we're going to head over to the Rhylight Zone. And this is Tori reading some of her poems at the Far Out Festival, Return to the Garden, I believe it was called, at the Rising Sun in Ickford, which my band played at as well. And I was selling some books. But anyway, here is Tori reading some poems.
So my name's Tori. I've been writing poetry for only a couple of years. And I'm going to start off by reading you a poem that I wrote in 2020, sorry. It was about 3 or 4 days into our first lockdown, and we weren't really sure what that was going to look like. And I was really pleased that I had some outlet for talking about it. And do you want me to offer a little bit? And so this one's called La Bestia. I know it's coming, an almost imperceptible rumble from far down the tracks, incongruous amongst the birdsong and the shushing of the breeze through the new green leaves. Against the clean blue sky and the holiday brightness of the naked sun, it gathers speed. I sense the tremor beneath my feet. And as we busy ourselves with simple familiarities, breakfasts of plain toast, wiping crumbs from the table into upturned palms, gentle chatter about how to enjoy this warming of the air, a picnic, a den, the veneer of jollity, of innocent amusements, of business as usual, slips a little from my face. The rumble becomes a clatter, plates chink each other on the dresser, and my breath catches in my throat. I know it's a journey. It won't deviate. The track is set, and the inevitability of this chaos waiting to thunder right through the centre of our lives, it nearly floors me. Yet bathing in that pain before it becomes our story is senseless. Fearing the train before it arrives wastes the energy we need to stand strong on the platform whilst it sucks the winds and deafens our ears on its path through. My task, my only role, is to hold you back from the edge, shelter you from the dust as it billows into the air, cover your ears with my palms, so when it has passed and the thunder turns back to a rumble and the wind drops back to a breeze, we are able to breathe again. So I'll avoid picking the bones of other people's misery from the heap of garish headlines, and I'll save the tears for when we need to cry together. And today, I shall sit with you in the sun and be grateful for the warmth against our skin. Be grateful that today we don't need to take that train, for it isn't our turn to ride. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So I'm just going to finish that little story off with a poem that I wrote just after the end of those first lockdowns. This is a little bit about what it was like to be kind of withdrawn from the world. It's a poem called In Hindsight. For a few months back there, I forgot to be me, shrank back to being defined by what other people see. Mother, worker, cleaner, sleeper, eater, cook, walker, writer, helper, how do I look? I stopped with the thinking, no time to step back. I stopped with the reading, too frantic for that. I let my mind wallow in worry and guilt, and I shut the windows and doors in this jail that I had built. But you didn't stop knocking. Come out to play, and slowly and gently you showed me a way to push out my walls, find some fresh air to breathe, to open the windows, to remember to leave the confines of my head a step at a time, to reach out and touch this world beyond mine that I made as protection from all these unknowns. You lifted my quarantine and guided me home. Thanks so much for listening. I was a little bit scared about coming and reading poetry to a group of people who are wonderful musicians. It's been really great to hear them. So I really appreciate you giving me a bit of space. Thanks, Dean. So those two poems are from my first book that I wrote 2 years ago. And I'm going to read you some stuff out of my notebook yet. Some of this hasn't been read to anyone, so I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to start with a poem called One Small Word, and I wrote this. I have two daughters. They're 16 and 13, and I think it's quite a difficult world to navigate as teenagers right now. And one of the things that I wished that I'd been told when I was a young girl was how to say no, and this is a poem called One Small Word. Such a small word, no, a single syllable to show the world that you know what you want and what you don't, to give you the space to face your heart square on and ask it, do we like what we've become? Is this the choice we wish to make, the path we want to take, or is it just the easy route, avoiding awkward edges, pauses, ledges we'd rather not peer over? A precious parcel of power and strength, I wish for you the guts to use it on its own, to speak it unqualified, by sorry, by do you mind? Just a solitary no that feels as pretty in your mouth as of course. Unapologetic, stark, a force to be reckoned with. If I could give you one gift to step into life with, it would be the confidence to say no. Thank you. So I don't know if any of you guys ever have had a panic attack, but they're kind of scary to deal with. And I have a poem next called A Pirate at the Helm. I love talking about pirates, but this isn't really a poem about pirates at all. This is A Pirate at the Helm. Panic attacks announce their arrival with sweaty palms and a sense that calm has jumped ship at the last port, receding at speed over the stern. Then comes the tingling hands, fingertips on fire, restless and desperate to grasp something solid before it slides away, listing dangerously sideways to let the water start streaming in. My neck tightens, breaths shorten, and the shouting inside my skull, screaming orders, drowns out the sensible suggestions. Take a moment, breathe deeply whilst you can, until all there is white, hot fear. I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Shoulders rising, chest collapsing in on itself under the weight of expectations, and even now, when we're taking on water and fighting to survive, she's sitting smugly in the crow's nest calling, "Not this again, how embarrassing you are, to make a scene, the centre of attention, drama queen," whilst she slashes at the sails and drives holes in the hull, my own private pirate who'd rather drown us all than give up her pride. So we tumble together over the side into crashing waves, fighting the tide, grabbing at the ocean as if it gives a damn, and sucking in mouthfuls of brine that sting the nose and choke in the throat, thrown head over heels until the seabed is above, with the sky below, and I'm drowning, I'm drowning, I'm drowning. But There is a small voice, a quiet voice, the one that holds on defiant, and when it all turns to black, it's her that takes my hand and swims us to the surface, strokes back sandy strands of hair and says the words that we need to hear. You're okay, you're okay, you're okay.
That was Tori Wagg doing a live reading of some of her poetry at the Far Out Festival at the Rising Sun in Ickford. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Alice Jane with Pulling Thread.
The pull of a sunset after the tears of a rainy day. All the melodies of laughter in your living room. It strings together all of the moments that call you broken. And there is a piece that connects with every piece. You're still pulling all the threads together, weaving our hearts beating, tying them next to yours. Already grown, the sunflower turns to as gently as time melts on. Climbing further, it blossoms in every truth, never questioning the beauty of perfection. You're still pulling all the threads together. together, weaving our hearts beating, tying them next to yours.
How was he to see himself, shaping better things like he read, filling every frailty with painted air instead? Everyone reminds him of those tall tales, summarized by chasing down fame. He channeled to a false dawn, and there he could not change. that he'll repair it with all his well-worn tricks. He draws back to bite his lip, hopes that's where his courage is, as he sets out to harness the pain to fight his fears. Cause she hasn't been the same since he was hiding from the truth. And so she couldn't sit and take it once enough to tolerate. It's on the walls upon the two. And oh, she's filling up the pages, cause she hasn't been the same since he was hiding from the truth. And so
That was Hiding from the Truth by Harry Quinn, and before that we had Pulling Threads by Alice Jane. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to join this week's guest now, who is poet Tori Wagg. Over to Tori.
So the first question is one that I ask everybody, which is, what was the last book that you read and what did you think of it?
Okay, the last poetry book or the last any book?
Any book.
I just finished the Dave Grohl autobiography. Well, kind of, you know, that little storybook. I love music, and so it was a real obvious choice for me. I loved that it was him writing, and I loved the stories where he was a bit naughty, but he wasn't as naughty as I wanted him to be. Like, I know there are more stories in there that he wasn't letting us in on. So yeah, it was like a 7 out of 10 for me.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, I've seen that around. I need to check that out myself. I will get to it at some point, so I'll let you know what I think when I get to it. But yeah, that's good. You've helped to sort of manage my expectations as well. Cool. So obviously today I want to talk to you about poetry. So I thought a good place to start would be for you to let us know how you got started. So you got started during the COVID lockdowns, right? So what made you first sort of pick up a pen and start writing sort of seriously?
Yeah, so I decided to start writing poetry a bit before lockdown, actually. So I'm one of those people that likes to set myself goals for the year and things to do that might be a bit out of my comfort zone. And so at the beginning of 2020, I decided I was going to just give it a try to do something creative outside of my kind of usual place that I sit, because in my day job, I'm an accountant, which is very numbers focused, but I have quite a creative desire. So, you know, if in a perfect world, I would have learnt to write songs, but I have no voice, no singing voice at all. It's just not something I can do. So I was like, how can I still be a bit involved in that kind of stuff, but not have to sing anything? Yeah. And so poetry seemed like the obvious way to go. So I kind of started at the beginning of 2020, and then, you know, we had lockdown within a couple of months of that. And I was so pleased that that was a thing that I'd started to get interested in doing, because it gave me an amazing outlet for a whole load of thoughts and feelings that I didn't really know what else to do with. And the sort of the way I got started on writing poetry was just doing it really regularly and really badly a lot, and being okay with that. So I started it as a project completely for me, not to be shared with anyone. It was quite a private thing. I was kind of like scared of what people might think of the sort of stuff I was writing, and I wanted to be very vulnerable and truthful with the way I approached my poetry, so I didn't show it to anyone for a while. And that, I think, is a really freeing way of approaching writing, because as soon as you're aware of an audience, I think you start to worry about how you're going to come across, and that can really stop some of the creative flow. So I wrote a lot. I wrote in the morning. I kind of used it as a sort of journaling process, and I tried not to think about it too much. So I tend in the rest of my world to work out how to do something really well, and I study and I go and see how other people do stuff, and I tried not to do that at all with my poetry, because I just wanted it to be fresh from my brain to the page as quickly as I could.
Cool, awesome. And one of the questions I wanted to ask, and it sounds like you've almost answered this already, but do you think you use poetry as like almost a form of sort of self-therapy?
100%. Yeah, but it's very much like that. And I'd say I'm kind of an introvert. People don't always say that about me because of the sort of job I do. I talk to a lot of people, but I find that quite tiring.
Yeah.
And I find it really hard to say exactly what I think and how I feel to people face to face. So poetry gives me an amazing outlet for saying all that stuff I'm too scared to say out loud.
Yeah.
And in fact, over time, by writing, it's helped me to get more confident with being more expressive anyway. And then once you stand up on a stage and start reading your poetry out to real people, that kind of breaks some of those barriers down. So yes, definitely a form of therapy, and a really good one.
Yeah, awesome. And obviously I met you at a Far Out Festival, and you did one of your readings there. What were your thoughts on it? How did your day go?
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. It was a properly welcoming festival of the best sort, where all the people there wanted to hear new things. They were really, really supportive. And I mean, I was given a long slot. I had half an hour of poetry, which I was a bit like, oh, who wants to listen to half an hour of poetry? But people did, and they were really lovely about it. And I had really nice feedback after I did my bit. And it was just nice to be put in between musicians as well. So there was a nice mix of different things going on. So yeah, great day. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome, cool. And you did some readings there. You read some from your book as well, and then some other poems as well, some of your new work. But could you tell us a little bit about your first book, and then we'll chat about your second book afterwards?
Yeah, sure. So part of that goal that I set myself for 2020 was to publish a short book of poetry, and to only publish one. So the idea is I just get one printed up. It will be for me, and it will be just that sort of tidy 1 year project. And then over time, as I talked to friends about what I was doing, and I showed a few more people my poetry towards the sort of September, October time of 2020, people started to say, I'd like a copy, or I'd be interested in a copy. So I changed up my plan a little bit, and I published, it's only a very short book. I mean, almost a chapbook, really. It's about 70 pages long. And just the project was a really fun thing to do. So to go off and find a cover designer that I really liked, and then to find out about how you even go about typesetting a book, and where you might want to publish it, and how you might go about the whole process of creating a physical book was really interesting. It took a lot of work, and I was really pleased to find like a whole community of people on Poetry Instagram, which is a nice place to hang out most of the time, who are really supportive about how to go about doing that, and even how to tell people that you're going to have a book out, and then make sure that it was available in the right sort of formats, in the right places. So I borrowed and stole from loads of other very friendly people that process, and it was fascinating. And so I got my book out printed through Lulu so that I could have physical copies myself, and then onto Amazon because people kept on asking me, is it going to be on Amazon? And I realized that that's the way that people do tend to buy their books. So I have it on Amazon as well as physical copies that I take to readings, or I send out to people that like approach me through my website or something like that.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. And actually, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, so you mentioned sort of the Instagram poetry community, and I wanted to ask you, are there any other sort of indie poets, indie writers who either you particularly admire or who you've been following quite a lot, that you can sort of give a little shout out to?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure there are, but that's taken me a bit by surprise. I probably need to have a little look at my Instagram. So the kind of community that helped me work out the publishing route was the Poet Possibilities community. I don't know if you've come across that. That's run by Watney, and she's a poet over in Canada, and she has like a kind of YouTube program to help people work out how to publish probably their first book and how to market that. And so I found that really, really helpful. Who else do I love? Blake Auden. Do you know Blake?
No.
You come across Blake? I think he's Brighton based.
Cool.
And I don't think I have one of his books on my shelf here. Yes, I do. It's called Beekeeper. That's his I think his most recent one. And just as somebody on Instagram who writes poetry that's not just 2 lines, if you know what I mean, that tends to be my kind of place. So Blake was a nice inspiration. So yeah, shout out to them.
Awesome. Cool. And so obviously when we were chatting, you mentioned you're currently working on your second poetry collection, and I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that. So what's the title and when are you hoping to have it out?
Yeah, so my second collection is called Open Heart Surgery. And that's got a particular resonance for me because I had open heart surgery when I was 4, and I read a poem that I think that you heard, Dane, called Zipper Club, which is going to be the opening poem in that collection. And what I wanted to pull into my second collection was a little bit more depth of emotion. The sort of bits that I started to discover in my first collection, I wanted to kind of delve into that and to talk a bit more into stuff around the heart. So the physical heart as well as the emotional heart. So that's the kind of theme for the book. My aim is to have it out by the end of July. So I'm getting really close, and I really hope that we'll get books on the shelf before the summer holidays start for me. So that's what I'm aiming for. And it's going to have a whole load of poems that are around that open heart conversation, but also some feminist poetry, some stuff that's happened over the last 18 months that have kind of blown our minds and has been hard to deal with, and it's a kind of working through of some of those more emotional issues. Yeah,
cool, awesome. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your heart, and I guess in particular how important it is for you to sort of raise awareness of these kinds of heart issues. Because you're quite open about it, and you chatted to people in the audience about it. I think you mention it at least in your author bio in your first collection as well. So yeah, how important is it for you to raise awareness of kind of these heart conditions and the impacts that they have? Because you have your heart is on the other side of your body as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. So my heart's on the right hand side. I used to say on the wrong side, but it's just a different side than everyone else. So I have that, and then I had 2 holes in my heart when I was very little, and those are the ones that were solved by my open heart surgery. And there's like this real community of people who've gone through that kind of surgery. I feel really blessed that I've always been very well with it, but I know lots of people that haven't been and that have had such a struggle with it, and it feels like something that we should talk about a lot more. A lot of my community are very quiet about their heart surgeries, but it has a real deep emotional impact on them. And so, I think it's a really important thing that I've got a bit of insight into, and I like to talk about. And I like to talk about scars as well, because I think scars are one of the things that really impact on people's confidence and sometimes on their mental health. That's definitely a theme that I see popping up time and again. And I didn't know I needed to talk about it, going back to that therapy part of poetry, until it started bubbling up as a theme over and over again. And I realized I probably did need to talk about it, and maybe other people did too. Yeah,
it's maybe, your sort of subconscious mind sort of directing you there a little bit.
You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with Tori Wagg, and this is Frank Birtwistle with Reflections. That was Reflections by Frank Birtwistle. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and we're joined in conversation now by poet Tori Wagg.
And I wanted to ask, so when you write poetry, like what's your approach? Do you use like a pen and paper or a computer or a phone? And do you go into it thinking, I'm going to write a poem about this, or do you just sit down and sort of see what comes out?
Yeah, quite a lot of the sit down and see what comes out works for me. My preferred method is pen and paper. I always have like a notepad hanging around somewhere, and I'm a journaler sort of by nature. So that's what I try to do. But having said that, my phone is a very useful asset. So, when you're on the bus and suddenly you just get these little phrases and you're like, oh, if I don't grab that, it's going to be gone in any moment. So I've learned to grab those into my notes really quickly. And I think, for people that are starting out, that's such a great place just to grab little phrases, even if it's 2 or 3 words that just resonate with each other, and stick them in your notes. Because I find if I am feeling a bit blocked, and that can happen quite a lot, and I'm finding it harder the more I write, because I have added thoughts about who's going to read and how this is going to turn into a poem. So when that happens, sometimes going back to your notes and just pulling some of those nice phrases out and using them as a starting place can be really, really helpful. So my the way I approach it, if there's any approach at all, is trying to not look too closely at what I'm doing, just looking at it out of the corner of my eye and allowing the words to flow as much as I can. So that's why I like to write early in the morning before my sort of logical brain is kicked in too much. And I try to get as much down in one flow as I can. So like a poem like that, Zipper Club, poem was written exactly as it came to my mind. It probably had 2 or 3 edits of a few words afterwards, but otherwise it's pretty much stream of consciousness. And I just feel blessed when that does happen, because you do have weeks that can go by where nothing happens at all. It can be a little bit off-putting, can't it? And that's when I'll go back to notes and see if I can pull things back that way. But I try not to force it too much. If they're there, they're there. And if the muse has left me for a while, then I just let that be the case and come back to it later.
That's it, yeah. And it's always going to come back as on. I love that idea of like looking at it out the corner of your eye, and it's kind of like if you focus on it too much, it'll disappear. It's almost like a little, like you know, when kids like blow bubbles or something like that. It's almost like that's how how delicate they are, and so you're just like, right, I'm just going to let this happen, and you kind of like just facilitating it by writing it down without, you know, as you say, without pushing it, because if you push it, the bubble will burst.
I know. I always find those poems where you've had to work hard at them, they feel like hard work. You can kind of hear it in the phrasing. And so, I try to just let it come through me. I don't think they're my poems at all. I think they just come through me and I happen to write them down at the right time. But it's a tricky little process, isn't it? And I think the only thing that I know definitely works is just writing really regularly, just doing it over and over again, however bad they are. You can chuck the bad poems, it doesn't matter. But I think you kind of have to work those through and until the good stuff starts to come. So the more you write, the better it gets. It's
almost like panning for gold or something, isn't it? So you get the odd, you know, the bits of rubbish, and you're like, okay, well, at least I wrote something, you know, so you can at least feel good that you wrote something, even if it's terrible. And then, you know, as you say, you never know when the great one's just going to sort of come through. And I want. Sorry, no, you go.
I was just going to say, even out of those terrible poems, sometimes you'll still find a little nugget of a gem of a line that can get reused somewhere else. So even the ones that you think aren't worth keeping, I always just hold on to for a few days anyway, just in case there's something that you missed because you were having a day where you're being tough on yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is whether you prefer free verse or rhyming poetry. And, you know, if you do have a preference, why is that your preference?
So I definitely started writing free verse, and I love that feels fluid. I really enjoy not being forced into rhyme. But the more I've stood up and read my poetry out loud, the more I've enjoyed the way that rhyme gives you something to kind of hang on to, and it allows the audience to, I think, follow you a little bit more carefully. And I just enjoy the sound of it. So I'm playing with rhyme more than I used to. But I think I naturally move away from a really structured type of poetry. I tend towards just taking it as it flows. But rhyme is exciting, and rhyme can really add energy to a poem that might not have it otherwise. So I think there's a lot to be said for having rhyming structures in there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that actually reminds me of what we were just talking about, because one of the problems that I have with rhyming poetry is when it does quite often feel forced, especially depending upon the rhymes they go for. Like sometimes you're just like, you've clearly just written that line just so that you can rhyme it with the previous line. And it can be done well, but it can also be done pretty badly as well. And actually one of the things I liked about your first collection is that you have both. So there were some rhyming poems in there, and there was some free verse, and there was some where it's like, it's mostly free verse, but maybe there's a couple of rhymes at this particular point or whatever. And I think that kind of keeps it fresh and keeps it interesting. And it's kind of, as you say, there are pros and cons to both free verse and rhyming poetry. And I think that, you know, by doing it the way that you've done it, you get the best of both worlds, and you kind of keep things fresh and interesting as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I only have a couple more questions just to end on. One of the ones I want to ask actually is what you think it is about poetry that makes it still relevant in today's day and age, because you get a lot of people being quite dismissive about poetry, mainly because they think, oh, it's just like William Wordsworth and Blake and all this stuff that they've been forced to read at school, and they don't realize, you know, what, again, like independent poets like yourself are actually out there doing today. But yeah, what do you think it is that makes poetry still relevant?
That's such a good question. I mean, it's relevant for me, it's relevant in the same way that music is still relevant, because music nowadays doesn't sound anything like music did 300 years ago, but it's still music. And I think poetry is just the same thing with the musical bit stripped out. You know, we've seen some more modern poets arriving, and poetry's become so much bigger over the last 5 years anyway, but there's such a need for people to express themselves through well thought out words. You know, we live in a world where people chuck words out into the world so fast, and sometimes they come back to bite them really hard. And so the thing about poetry is that it's all about words that are carefully placed in a certain order, and each one has been chosen for a really good reason. And I think that that lovely thing about poetry is that it's thought through, and there's always going to be a place for that. And I think you know, kids get that. They listen to so much music now, and they hear so many lyrics, and it's often the lyrics that's pulling them into the music that they're interested in. So I think it's as relevant as it's ever been, if not more so. And the thing that's really special about poetry is you need nothing in order to write it. I mean, maybe a pen, but you could do it just in your head, and you can do it anywhere, and it's not restricted at all. Everybody has the gift to do it, because as long as you've got some language, you can write poetry. And I think that's an amazingly open and free thing that we can all get involved in. So it's like the most open form of expressing ourselves you could possibly find.
Yeah, I love that. That was a great answer. And I think as well, you know, with people from marginalized communities, for example, the great thing about poetry is it's kind of like a leveler. Like, it puts everybody on the same footing, and everybody's got a story to tell, and everybody's got their own sort of voice. Whereas I suppose with some things, you know, there are like more sort of like class divisions, or, you know, whatever it is. But yeah, and that's one of the great things if you ever go to, and actually I was going to ask you about this, because you're sort of located near Oxford. And so you've done a bunch of sort of readings in and around Oxford. And when you get to a place where you have like, you know, multiple poets, like 4 or 5 poets all turning up, it's fascinating because they're all so different and they all approach things so differently. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the events and or venues sort of local to you that you'd recommend people checking out?
Yes, so in Oxford, there's the Oxford Poetry Library. Have you come across that? It's incredible. Yeah, so it's based in sort of in an open community space right opposite Oxford train station, and they have just started this month, actually, they've started a monthly open mic for poets. I turned up this last month and it was absolutely sold out for slots. You couldn't get onto the list for reading, and it was packed with incredible poets. So if you're around the Oxford area, that is the one that I would definitely say get yourself down there. Hear the Word is another Oxford-based poetry group, and they are still meeting on Zoom. And throughout the lockdown, I found that a really lovely place to share poetry. It's very supportive. It's been going for a long time. There are some incredible poets in that group. So those are my sort of 2 top tips.
Awesome, brilliant, cool. And the last question, which is technically 2 in 1, but it's what's next for you, and where can people follow you to find out more?
Yeah, so next up is Open Heart Surgery, coming out at the end of this month, fingers crossed. And the easiest place to find me is on Instagram. It's Tori Wagg Poetry, or over on my website, which is just toriwagg.com, which is the joy of having such a weird name. It's the only one there. So you can find me over there and order my books that way, or Instagram.
Big thank you to Tori Wagg for joining me. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Maz Manzini with Parisian Girls.
September's sun beats down the road, slowly walking by in front of you. The girl was smoking the silent espresso. Take it all in slow, 'cause Parisian girls, they knock me out. Parisian girls, they knock me out. In the sunny streets of Saint Michel, city's beating heart is alive and well. taps of Beaujolais. I find myself a mama's there who wants to play. 'Cause Parisian girls, they knock me out. 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 Parisian girl, you 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 knock me out. She walk, she walk, she walk. Parisian girls, they knock me out. Parisian girls, they knock me out. Parisian girls, they knock me out. Parisian girls, they knock me out.
It's an analogy just like that. It's come and it's gone. Sink or swim, the final dichotomy. In or out, bright or it's dim. All that you are, all that you're ever wanting to be, I'll give you. All that you are, all that you're ever wanting to be, I'll give you. All that you are, all that you're ever wanting to be, with you. All that you are, all that you're ever wanting to be. It's a monopoly set to play capitalist ploy. Black or white, a hard type philosophy. Bad or thin, a constant fight. All that you are, all that you're ever wanting to be, I'll give you. All that you are, all that you'll ever wanting to be, I'll give you. All that you are, all that you ever wanting to be, I'll give you. All that you are, all that you ever wanting to be. Hup.
That was Black and White by the Rock'n'Roll Morning Band, and before that we had Parisian Girls by Maz Manzini. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Ilk Shed to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Dusty Springfield, The Silver Collection. Mary Isabel Catherine Bernadette O'Brien, aka Dusty Springfield, grew up in the Sands area of High Wycombe and died in Henley. One of my earliest musical memories is of seeing the Springfields on the telly, probably Thank Your Lucky Stars. The Springfields were like a British Peter, Paul and Mary, and it was news when Dusty left to go solo, and when she had a big hit with I Only Want to Be With You. It made her a pop star, one of the in crowd appearing on Ready Steady Go. After that I took little interest in her. To me, she was just another Saturday night light entertainment TV show host, taking turns with Cliff and Scylla and Lulu, and probably guesting on such horrors as The Val Doonican Show. That was the reality of the swinging 60s. She was almost better known for her bouffant hair and dark eyeshadow than the music. It was only really when she was adopted by the Pet Shop Boys that I really took her seriously. You can find any number of budget Dusty Springfield compilations, and she has had so many excellent songs given to her to sing by some of the greatest songwriters of the era that they will always be chock full of goodies. The song that has most contributed to her reputation as Britain's best ever white female soul singer is Son of a Preacher Man, which is from an album she recorded in Memphis. I chose this particular compilation because it has Wishing and Hoping, which they don't all have. Other great songs to look out for are I Just Don't Know What to Do With Myself, You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, I Close My Eyes and Count to 10, and Going Back. The Silver Collection, Dusty Springfield.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to Tori Wagg for joining me and for also letting us share some of her poetry. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We're repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And you can reach out to me here at the studio by dropping me an email. My email address is, knocking the microphone there. My email address is dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain @wickhamsound.org.uk. So as always, thanks a lot for listening. I will see you next week. In the meantime, this is Mr. Grey by Humans Can't Reboot. Catch ya.
Summer's day, you meet a man who leads you astray. You meet a man who complain our life like we're betrayed of yourself. Mr. Dorian Gray, Mr. Dorian Gray, Mr. Dorian Gray. It shows the once kind, gentle Mr. Grey, who we used to love and know, who we used to love and know, who we used to love and know.